This story starts off in a house in West County Dublin, or West Dublin. And it was a new house. If you remember a few years ago, they brought houses out and they threw them down in the fields all around Dublin, and they called them housing estates, and that was it. All you got was your house. So there were some terrace houses built in a new estate, and there was a little boy called Michael, and Michael lived there with his parents. And he was about 7 or 8 years of age, I suppose, and children can be fanciful and tell you stories about imaginary friends and imaginary things. And he was talking about seeing men with swords and shields and spears and warriors. And that for a boy seemed to be fairly appropriate. But he was saying it too much. And his father listened to him and he said to him, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "I saw a man standing on the corner," and he described sackcloth. And he said he was very hungry looking and very tired, and he was looking up the road waiting for somebody. But it wasn't the clothes that people I know wear, strange clothes. So he described it, and it was sackcloth as far as the father could make out. So he was saying, "Oh, what about it? He'll grow out of it." Until one night the father was in the house, and the back door was certainly locked, and the front door was closed behind him, and he went to go up the stairs. And as he went up the stairs, a man came down the stairs in clothes of a long time ago, and he had a sword and a sort of a helmet on his head. And he looked at him. The father looked at this man, and the man came down the stairs and passed him by without a word and went out the door without opening it. He was gone. By which stage, I guarantee you would even be frightened at this stage. Never mind Michael, the child. A man had just come down and walked through your door and was gone. So he called his wife, and they discussed it, and they wondered what they might do, because they knew now that the child was seeing something that had to be resolved. So they called in a clairvoyant. And the clairvoyant came in and sat down with Michael and started to attune herself to his vision. And between them they saw, outside on a suburban estate, they saw soldiers of long ago marching away to a battle with long double-handed axes and swords and all the accoutrements of battle. And some of them had long hair that was greasy and braided and in their belts for easier running and so that they couldn't be caught. And so she paid several visits to the house, and she saw oxen pulling a cart, or pulling carts back and forth with dead and dying people in them. And those who were wounded and were well enough able were patched up and sent back up. The others were tumbled off the carts and lay where they fell. At another time, she saw, through Michael, she saw families of some of the combatants going through the battlefield looking for their loved ones to see where they had fallen, if they were still alive, to help them, and if not, to give them a proper burial. And in the distance at night, she could see flickering campfire and shadows flitting past it where people were preparing for the next day. And slowly but surely she closed down the boy's vision until finally he could see nothing else. And she left, and she told the parents what had happened, what she had seen, but her job was to assist the boy and let him have some peace so that he no longer saw these things. And she went. And that was the story I had. But I happened to be telling this story. I heard the story from the clairvoyant and believed that the clairvoyant believed it. Now, sometimes I said, sometimes you believe a story, sometimes you hear a story that is believable but that you don't believe. And I reserved judgment. I said, well, I don't know whether that happened at all or not, or whether it's something else. And I happened to be telling it. And there was a young mother listening, and there was a group of people I was telling it to, and there's a young mother listening, and she said, I used to live up that direction in a different estate, and I had small children, and I used to tell them stories at night before they went to bed, because it was a little bit more special for them to tell them downstairs in that particular family rather than upstairs, because they were staying up, they were older, to hear a story. And she said a small boy used to come down the stairs in olden clothes, sat at the foot of the stairs and looked through the banisters while I told the story. And several times I invited the child to come and join us, and the child did not, just kept looking at us. And when the story ended, that child went back upstairs. And I followed after, she said. I could find him. I could not find him. And her husband searched and they couldn't find him. And the children weren't perturbed because for children, God bless them, sometimes it doesn't matter if they see somebody is there or not there. They didn't pay any heed to it. And so it was the next part of the story. And I said, oh, right. Then I happened to have a conversation with a friend of mine who was an adult, somewhat the same generation as myself, and we call her Aisling. And Aisling said, we lived in a house in that area when it was a rural area before houses were built at all. And when we played in the fields all around where we lived, we ran free. There was no worry about children going out to play. They went out in the morning and they came back in the evening, or they came back when they were hungry or thirsty. They just went and they played. And there was one field that all the rest would go into, but I could not go into, because when I came to that field, I felt faint and nauseous. And there was a weird smell. And I called it the Weirdy Field when I was small. I didn't have a better name for it. And I said, well, where was it? And so it was in the same general area. I said, I wonder, is it connected? She said, I went into the documents office, whatever the documents would cover that area, or maps would cover that area, and I researched it. And she said, I found the field. And the name of that field in the old language, in Irish, translated into English, is the Blood Field. And she said, when I read that, I realised that the smell I had smelt as a small girl was the smell of dried blood. So now, I had a clairvoyant who had a boy who saw scenes of battle. I had a young mother who saw a small child from, we guessed, that period come sit and listen to a story in peace with other children away from conflict. And now we had my friend, who I believe, when she said that field was a weird field, strange field, weirdy field. Grass grew greener there, grew taller there. I don't know why. I didn't know why. Now I think I do. So I researched it. I said, well, there's probably a story in this. Link it through. I'll try and find out what it was. And I discovered that at one time in around 850 AD, in the 9th century, when the Vikings ruled Dublin, the king of Dublin was Olaf the White. And he had a fort up where modern Clondalkin is. They went up the river to where there, Palmerstown, King's Hospital, thereabouts. And they went up across the hill, out of the valley, and they went over, and they had a settlement there, a fort or a dune. And the townland up there is called Dún Álaí, which is Olaf's fort. And he ruled from there. And in and around sometime in the 9th century, he went down to the river with his men. They got into their longboats and they sailed out through Dublin Bay, and they went over to Northumbria and they waged war over there. And while they were away, the Irish, under a chieftain called Gachna, rose up and attacked the defenders of the Viking fort. And a great battle took place in what we now know as the Bloodfield. And where people were killed, they fell, they were buried. And their blood flowed into the soil. And their bones and bone marrow became part of the land. And the grass grew green and tall in that place. So Michael, it seems, was seeing the battle preparation and aftermath. The small child coming down the stairs was probably a member of a family hearing a story. And my friend Aisling had visited the battlefield, although she did not know it. So I had all of those things together. And again, slight doubt in my mind, maybe it's coincidence, maybe it's not. And I tell it to you tonight, and you can make up your own mind as to the conclusion I come to with this, but I believe all of these things to be true. 4. They built a shopping centre up in that area called Liffey Valley Shopping Centre. And there's several car parks in it, as there are in most of these shopping centres. And there's one that's not used an awful lot during the day. It's more or less an overflow car park. And I had to do some business with a chap I didn't know what he looked like. And he was coming from the country, and I said, look, I live nearby. And I said, let's meet there in that car park. I drive that sort of a car, what do you drive? So we said, right. And so we drove in 2 cars, empty car park. So I went over to him anyway, and hello, yeah. And so we sorted out what we had to sort out, and we were happy. And I walked back to my car about 100 metres. And as I walked on a day like this, a cold breeze came across that car park, and it wrapped itself around me. And I shivered, because somebody had stood on my grave. And I looked around, and there was old trees growing over in the side, on the perimeter, that had not been felled when they built the new facility. And sometimes in your peripheral vision you see something. And I saw on my side of my eyes something flickering in those trees. And when I looked around and stared, there was nothing. But I was in the area of the blood field. And something wrapped itself around me. And I saw something move in the trees. Now, whether you believe the story or not is for you to believe. But I, for my part, will never go back near that place again unless I am called